Right, okay, we're live. So, welcome back to Slightly Offensive Podcast, episode 11. I'm joined with Nick Griffin. Do you want to introduce yourself, Nick?
I'm Nick Griffin, former leader of the British National Party, and as such, the most successful nationalist party in Britain in electoral terms in the whole of history. I've not been involved in politics since 2015, primarily because I don't believe that there's now a political solution to the mess that Britain's in. So it's fakery to tell people, join my party, join me, give me money, and I'll sort it all out. Can't be done. But that's not a black pill. I believe that there's an enormous amount that can be done. I'm just saying we cannot turn the clock back through the ballot box.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you know what? I'd like to speak to you because I did follow the British National Party. I did my homework, and I was looking. I liked quite a lot of your policies, but there was one thing. There was one thing you were talking about. I think it was to do with the death penalty. We had a debate about that a couple of weeks ago. Would you think that would be a good idea to bring that back, the death penalty for heinous
I,
crimes?
I certainly believe that it's necessary, and the more the law and order situation in Britain, in fact, the West in general, declines, the more obvious that becomes. I know there's some people from a simplistic Christian perspective who say, "Oh, you can't take a life." But I would say that historically, Christianity is, until very recently, with the wave of crazed liberalism that's overtaken it, Christianity has made it very, very clear it's wrong to take an innocent life, but that the death penalty for really serious crimes at the end of really genuine fair trials is absolutely justified and it's socially necessary.
Yeah, definitely. I could agree with that. I'd like to speak about more recent topics. Obviously, I know you're quite a strong believer in there's obviously the Zionists. People say it's a conspiracy. I don't think it is a conspiracy, but that they infiltrate every level of the government and other things as well, such as finance and stuff like that. So, what would your I suppose we say, I'm a believer in peace in Israel and Palestine, but what would your ideal outcome be in this war?
Well, as a British nationalist, my position has always been that the British people should only get involved in wars that directly affect our interests. There shouldn't be a penny of British money or a drop of British blood goes into other people's wars. And in the case of the crisis in Palestine and Israel, and for that matter, Ukraine, there is no strategic or proper interest for Britain in those wars. They're nothing to do with us, unless you look at it from the point of view that the Ukrainian war would have stopped 2 years ago if our Boris Johnson hadn't kept it going. And there wouldn't be a genocidal war going on in Gaza right now if it wasn't for the Balfour Declaration, etc., etc., and the fact that the British elite helped to create the illegal state of Israel in the first place. But
Right.
that said, you could say, therefore, we have a moral responsibility. I'm not one who believes in colonial guilt and so on, or the sins of the fathers being pushed upon the children to the nth degree. So, despite what the British elite did more than 100 years ago, I don't believe that we certainly shouldn't be providing arms and assistance for Israel to murder tens of thousands of innocent civilians. But for that matter, neither should we get involved at the other extreme, saying, well, we're going to go in and sort Israel out, and protect the people of Gaza. It simply is not our fight.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that completely. But the Israel Gaza thing as well. I see. I think a lot of people, the reason that they kind of are falling more towards Israel on the right is because they don't agree with the Palestine protesters and stuff like that. They think they're the new BLM. That's what they've been, kind of coined as the new
Yeah.
BLM. I think it's a bit of it's quite different in a sense because with BLM, they were fighting for a cause that really didn't make sense. I mean, a lot of people were saying abolish the police. A lot of people were saying, it
Yeah.
didn't really make sense, and it was all over nothing. But this Israel-Palestine thing, God bless the protesters that are going out and protesting, because they actually, even though, a lot of them would hate people like me and you that have right-wing views, they're protesting for the right thing for once. And I think it's kind
Yeah.
of... Sorry, go on.
Yes, I agree with you there. It sticks in my craw at a certain level to see all these foreign flags flying on our streets.
Mm.
But people who say that, and there's plenty on the right, saying, oh, they're flying the Palestinian flag, it's wrong, shouldn't be done. But they've all been happy enough with Tommy Robinson for more than a decade now to fly the Israeli flag. And the key difference there is that the Israeli flag is the flag which came from a group of terrorists who got their state by murdering British soldiers, whereas the Palestinians have never attacked Britain. So if anyone's foreign flag is going to fly in British soil while there's demonstrations on, then I'd rather see the Palestinian one than the Israeli one. Overall, I'd rather none of them were flying their flags in our country, because I'd rather they weren't here. But the simple fact is that they are here, and as our elite had created this multicultural Britain, and as the British people didn't, frankly, do enough to resist it, we've now got it. And you can't have people in your country and say, oh, they're equal. In fact, they're wonderful people, and you need them to pay your pensions. It's this enriched society, and then get upset when they get upset because something is happening back in their homeland or a country or among a people for whom they've got a lot of sympathy. You simply can't say, well, we'll have them here to do the work. We'll have them here to enrich our country. We'll have them here to pay our pensions, but they mustn't demonstrate on behalf of a cause that they feel strongly about. It's an utter nonsense. And it's a very dangerous nonsense, actually, in that now we've got this multiracial, multicultural Britain. We've got to try to find some way to make it sort of function and not to collapse into a civil war, which is actually the default position of multicultural societies throughout history. And it's what the Tommy Robinsons, etc., and for that matter, the crazed and Western intelligence services backed people like ISIS, they want a civil war. And ordinary, sensible human beings, especially Christians, cannot want a civil war. So therefore, we've got to try and make this thing work. And I think there's many things that would have to be done before a multiracial society stands a chance of working. As I say, I didn't want it. I spent my life fighting against it, but we've got it now. But among the things that need to happen, so perhaps it won't end in the most ghastly bloodshed, is that people such as Muslims living in Britain, probably working in Britain, many of them paying taxes in Britain, but they're British citizens, and of course they've got to be allowed to demonstrate and to fly whatever flags they want in our streets, because we're told now they're streets. On the other hand, the thing, of course, every leftist and liberal in Britain will say the same thing. Oh, I agree with Nick Griffin. Isn't that odd? They won't agree with me on the next point when I say that in order for some sort of new multicultural Britain to work, the absolutely crucial thing that has to be done is that the British people, the indigenous British in general, and the English in particular, have to get a fair crack at the whip. We have to be allowed to organise, to mobilise people in defence of our rights and our culture, because at present we're second-class citizens. I'm sure you have seen plenty of examples of that, and that has to be put right. Until the grotesque unfairness to the indigenous people of these islands is put right, then there's not a hope in hell of a peaceful going forward.
Yeah, that's right. You see a lot of people as well with this, in the multicultural society, it doesn't work. And as you've said there, it hasn't worked any time in history. The only time that, I could see immigration did, benefit is places, like America, where we went, and it was, but the thing is, the people that were moving to America were Europeans. And
They're all Europeans. Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
the fact of the matter is, Europeans, civilization has been civilized for over 2,000 years, dating back to the Romans and even before then.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go to places like sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, they didn't even have a written language until we came over and invented for them 400 years ago. So how can you expect to import them people to places that are already built up, and then they're moaning about colonialism and stuff like that? But with America as well, especially, I see this. You can't compare people moving to a completely desolate land and building a whole civilization to you coming to an already built up land and then claiming benefits of the system. It's not the same. It's not the same struggle.
Yeah, sure, sure. There's many differences. I'd like actually to ask you, and I'm sure you sort of the people that you know in your audience, friends and family, and so on, you know their opinions. So I'd actually I'd like to ask you a few questions about where young people in your part of Britain sort of where you think we are with this and where we're going to go in a bit. Just before I do that, I'd just like to say, although I said, and you've agreed, that the default position of multicultural societies tends to be pretty bloody, it's not absolutely inevitable. And there are actually, we think, because historically, and particularly because we're an island, but also because we're at the tail end of an era when the powerful nation state with one people, one language was the dominant force in world history, and certainly in Europe, Britain, France, Germany, Holland, etc. So we tend to think that the Britain which we've now lost, which I actually remember, but you read about, seen on television and so on, it did exist. So the basically monocultural England, you can't say monocultural Britain because there was Welshness with a very different language and culture and so on, but it was a monocultural, a monoethnic country in most of its places. And so that was the natural thing to us, but it's not absolutely natural in human society. You've got many societies, I'm thinking, for instance, somewhere like Indonesia, where you've got hundreds of different tribes, languages, religions, and generally at present they tend to get on. India has many faults, but it is going to be one of the superpowers of the new world, and it's a very multicultural society, again, with huge numbers of tribes and languages, and of course their caste system. A better example in terms of, well, actually, it's not so bad when you really look at it, although it's not what we're used to, is Russia. Russia is a multicultural, multi-ethnic empire, but at the core of Russia, whereas at the core of our multiracial shithole, quite frankly, you've got an indigenous white community who are put down, looked down upon, spat upon, abused, discriminated against, and looted blind for taxes. And it's all our fault. Whereas in Russia, you've got this huge multicultural empire, but the core of that, especially now under Putin, is this is a Russian and a Christian state, and other people who obey our laws are fully entitled to all its protections and so on. But they've got to understand that they're part of Russia, and our Russia is going to remain white Russian, and it's going to remain Christian. And is a very different way of looking at the multiculturalism. And I would say that clearly the Russian system works, despite the best efforts of the likes of the CIA to try and tear it apart. And patently, our version of multiculturalism is not working and is highly destructive. At least that's my take on it. How do you and people of your age, who are sort of on a nationalist perspective, how do you see what's happened to Britain, and what do you believe is possible and could or should be done to change things around in the future?
Well, I'm quite an optimist. A lot of people that are my age, they're quite pessimistic. They say there's nothing we can do now. That's just the way it. That's a lot of the attitude is. It's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think really the only possible way of fixing Britain is through Christianity. And I see a lot of people now, you even see this in the Palestine protests. A lot of people are looking for spirituality outside of just, crystals and stuff like that. They're looking towards, even in the Palestine protests, they're doing calls to prayer for Islam. I don't believe Islam's the way forward. I believe it's a completely, outdated religion. But I think Christianity is the way to go. I mean, it says in the Bible, the Bible doesn't teach you, a set of moral laws in the New Testament. It teaches you, moral laws. It teaches, moral laws like love one another as I've loved you in the New Testament, whereas the Old Testament is more, like don't do this, don't do that. But with Christianity, I think, that message of loving one another is something that we've lost over the years, because if you look at the decline of, even going back to when I was younger in school, it's not the same country as it was before. I remember getting back from COVID and all this BLM stuff happened, and it was like, back before then, COVID, I think I was in year 10 when COVID hit, but year 9, all the blacks and the whites, they play football together, there was no problem. But then you got to the BLM, and it was literally, you got to the playground, and it was just black here, white here. It was complete divide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of people let all like the media and social media and stuff like that, they let it influence them too much, their opinions. Where what's any different from last year when we were all playing football together to this year when we're not anymore, when we literally hate each other?
Interesting. Is that something now that, because the BLM thing present has passed, do you know, has that polarization tended to resolve itself and go back to normal, or is there still a lingering impact from it?
I think do you know what? I think it's more divided than ever. There's so it's so strange that like people just it was always kind of like that. You obviously you always kind of stuck to your own. That's like people just did. White people were normally more tend to mix with other cultures and stuff like that. But you find like blacks and Asians, they didn't. They would rather stick to their own, which is I find very strange. But I think that's a lot of the white guilt stuff that people put the media push on us and stuff like that. But yeah, more than ever, it's so divided, and I think people, especially white young men like me, they're waking up to it more, and they're seeing, well, this can't go on. There has to be an answer. It's they're no longer interested in the guilt, feeling the guilt of colonialism and stuff like that. It's they're not interested in it anymore. They want to move past that, and I think it's happening, and the people don't know what to do. They don't know how to deal with it, so they're pushing as much as they can to try combat that, especially in schools and stuff like. You see, a lot of the reels and stuff you see on Instagram now, it's very Christian nationalist, and it's being pushed. A lot of young people are seeing this. It's like an awakening sort of thing on Instagram and TikTok, stuff like that. Especially with the Andrew Tate thing, that really helped.
Yeah. So when I was your age, involved in politics, very, very, very much so. At the age of 19, I was very active in the National Front on a daily basis, and there were a few older people in the movement who were Christians, usually traditional Catholics. Yeah. But among the younger people, there wasn't a hostility to Christianity, but there was zero interest in it. And everybody who was involved in politics, either on the left or the right, believed in materialistic problems, had materialistic solutions. And there was not the faintest concept of a Christian nationalism in Britain. And anyone who talked about it would frankly have been regarded as some kind of crank. Now, there's not a position I now take. I started sort of coming back to Christianity on a cultural basis, and then on, if you like, a political basis, in that seeing that we face not our society doesn't, and decency in our country doesn't face a problem from something like communism, from an ideology anymore. We face a problem with two distinct religions, anti-Christian religions, one of which is Islam and the other of which is atheism, which is also a religious faith held with a religious fervour and hugely hostile to Christianity. So I began to see some years ago that actually to try and fight faiths, religions with a political ideology is like taking a knife to a gunfight. So you can only fight to preserve our culture, our civilization, and our ways. When the enemy is religious, you have to have a religion. What can our religion be? Only Christianity. And then, having sort of come to it from that tactical sort of perspective, I then got deeper and deeper in terms of, well, actually it's true and it's a spiritual thing as well. And this is a spiritual struggle. But that took me a long time. And as I say, when I was your age, none of us would have considered the possibility of Christian nationalism, although people like Cornelio Codriano of the Iron Guard, who was he was the great and most Christian of the fascist leaders before the war. He was a sort of a figure we read about and idealized, but still we were not Christian. So you're now very different. And so I know that, as you say, there's a big element now on Instagram, which is young Christian nationalism. But when you talk about this to people, not just you're directly involved with, but perhaps a little bit further out, if you got talking to a couple of lads in a pub or whatever about the problems, would you be able to talk about Christian nationalism and they at least, even if they don't agree with you, they see you coming from a legitimate and normal perspective? Or is there still a tendency to think, well, this is something rather wacky? How mainstream is it now?
I think it's quite mainstream, especially up north. There's certain areas in the country, like if I was to walk in Oxford, for example, I wouldn't dream of talking about Christian nationalism because just
Yeah. Well,
there's no point. But yeah, definitely up north, a lot of people are, they're waking up to the sort of thing like that we need Christ, because the north especially has been hit hard from this. I mean, Birmingham,
mhm.
Manchester, Leicester, they're different countries. You go to Birmingham, it's not safe. Like Coventry, I don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable walking around the town centre of Coventry. If I go to Birmingham, it's like I wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? I wouldn't walk around there. The
Yes.
furthest I go is to the airport. That's it. But
Mm.
when you, like you say, when over a 30-year span, if you're importing a different culture, people are gonna fall to extremes naturally. And I think I don't believe Christian nationalism is an extreme, but people see it as that,
Mm.
Mm.
and it's sort of like in Weimar Germany, you fall to National Socialism, we fall to communism, and I think people now are waking up to the point where we need to combat this. Everything we've tried hasn't worked. Christianity is the
Yeah.
only way. I think that
Yes.
people are waking up to that, and it's becoming a lot more mainstream. Definitely up north.
Very, very interesting. And so then, sort of taking this forward, if so, a Christian nationalism is part of the way forward. Where would it sit in your mind in uh, not your ideal Britain, because forget ideals, we have to deal with where we are and what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So as if you're talking with a group of friends who are absolutely on your Christian nationalist basis, what's the best case scenario that you can envisage for a Britain for your kids as they reach your age, for example?
I think the best scenario now would be deportation of immigrants. You'd have to deport all illegal immigrants, and you'd have to structure it based on putting the British people first, and then the
Mm.
rest of the people that want to immigrate. Okay, I like the I think it was UKIP. They had a good policy. It was like first you get taxed 50%, and then it goes down as you work, but you're not allowed to claim benefits. I like that system, but
Mm.
more than anything, I want a safe Britain. I want a Christian Britain, and I want a safe Britain. And I think that the only way to have a safe Britain is with Christianity. If you go to if you wash up on an island full of atheists, then they have no God. They have no problem with eating you if they're hungry. But if you go to an island full of Christians, they won't eat you
Mm-hmm.
because their God tells them not to. And by that sense, you were saved by God. That island's always going to be more safer than the one with no God, or the one with a
Yeah.
different God to us. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't have Britain's never been Islamic, and it's never been atheist. It's been pagan, yeah, but paganism doesn't work. Christianity is the only thing that kept Britain safe for hundreds of years, and it's the only
Yeah.
thing that will continue to keep Britain safe.
Yeah. Absolutely. So coming back to what you said there, sort of, you were talking about solutions, things that can be done, deporting illegals and changing the tax laws, etc., etc. My problem with all of this, and I agree in principle, yeah, that's what would be wonderful to do. But I've never believed that you should run politics according to the magic wand tooth fairy version, whereas you wave your wand and that's it. So you spend all your time working out perfect policies. Unless you're going to achieve state power, you have no possibility of putting those policies into practice. And my experience over many years has convinced me that it's no longer possible to achieve state power in Britain on a nationalist agenda. The odds are simply too stacked, not just the demographic odds, but the whole way the system works, the power of the media, the fact that the uniparty's monopoly is so strong that it cannot be broken, even if we end up with proportional representation, which, if the election is closer than people at present say it is going to be, is entirely possible. Then you can get you'd get the Tory party splitting, you get something led by Nigel Farage, actually probably holding 15% of the seats in Parliament. So you can have political representation, but you're never going to get a majority in Britain for really effective action to turn the clock back. So someone can say, oh, well, that's cowardice and demand mass deportation for as long as they live, but it ain't going to happen. So if someone accepts, and certainly even 15 years, 20 years ago, the most common reason that we get on the doorstep campaigning for the BNP for someone saying, I'm not going to vote for you, the most common reason of all wasn't, oh, I disagree with you. Oh, I love multicultural Britain. It's all so fantastic. Oh, I've got all these wonderful Muslim friends, etc. The most common reason for people saying, I'm not going to vote for you, was even then they said, it's simply too late. I agree with what you're saying, but it can't be turned around. It's simply too late. And we're 15, 20 years further down the line. It's a hell of a lot later than it was then. So if you take my position that it's, like you indicated, probably you agree with it, unfortunately, that it's too late to turn things around, then equally it's too late, therefore, to get state power. So we have to accept, most reluctantly, that the British and the English, we are going to become a minority by about 2060. And there's nothing that can be done to change that. So I think that if we're a minority in a more Christian country, minorities are better treated under Christianity than any other religion, for one thing. But my position, again, I don't believe it's a black pill, it's realism. I believe that if the British in general and the English in particular are an organised minority with a strong, fervent faith at the heart of our identity, with an end to all the white guilt nonsense and the post-colonial claptrap and so on, then we're going to be a minority, but we're going to be by far the biggest minority for a very, very long time. And as long as our people remember to have kids, we'll always be the biggest the biggest minority. And we can also be the dominant minority, not meaning to dominate others and be cruel to them, but to establish and to maintain the fact that although the British are now a minority in the island of Britain, it still is a British society, and the incomers who've come here need to, and do because it's actually a good society, they need to accept that. So that's the position that I think we're going to be. Is that a position which people your age, when it's explained like that, is there a mental block? I simply cannot accept being a minority, so you simply can't see it and accept it? Or does it actually sound logical? And then the question becomes not how we're going to wave a magic wand and stop it all happening, but how we're going to settle down, actually organise and do practical things to make sure that we are an effective, organised big minority. A lot of questions, but what do you think?
Well, do you know what? I don't think that people are willing to accept that they'll become a minority. But like you say, people will vote Labour just because their parents vote Labour. So it's kind of like, you're adding to your own, fall. You're adding to the fall of Britain. But people, I think you are right. We need to organise a lot more. There needs to be a lot more, but I don't see people accepting that at the moment anyway. I think it annoys people because no one asked for this, and it's being completely forced on the young people, and the fact is they don't want it. No one wants it. And I think people struggle accepting that. I think it will become a lot more of a violent place when
yes, I find that people do struggle to accept it, but even back in 1990, up until 1996, the British National Party, which was by far, this was before I led it actually, but it was even then the most effective of Britain's nationalist parties, and up until 96 it had a position of, we stand for compulsory repatriation. We're going to stand for elections, we're going to get elected, and then we're going to expel all of them, every last one of them who's come here, or if their family came here after 1948, which is when it really began. And in 96, 97, even the BNP under John Tyndall changed that because it was very clearly unworkable, unsaleable. It's just unworkable on a practical basis. You couldn't get the British people to accept it because it would involve vast amounts of money. Many families have got some member of their family who's in some kind of reasonable relationship with a member of an ethnic minority. Lots of families have got some mixing and so on. Everyone's got one good immigrant that they really love, don't want to see anything nasty done to them. So there was this big debate in the serious nationalist movement. The people who'd been at the sort of political coalface for years. There was this big debate, and the party came down very, very strongly to say, right, it's got to be voluntary. And it's strange to me now that I'm back making the same arguments with young people, saying, no, it's got to be voluntary, and you've got to accept, actually, therefore, we're not going to have state power anyway, that we're not in a position to change things. Like you say, people will vote Labour this time in huge numbers because they're sick of the Tory party. And in probably 10 years' time, they'll vote in huge numbers Conservative because they're sick of the Labour Party. But whatever they say about mass immigration, both of those parties and all the others in the electoral system who might win some sort of power, they're all in favour of mass immigration for various different reasons. So it's going to continue. Plus, we've, of course, got an appalling demographic bust in Britain that genuinely now, if we stopped all immigration, we're going to face a society which is just like South Korea, just like Japan, where everything is stagnating because the population is too old. There simply aren't enough young people. So actually, for Britain to function as a consumerist capitalist society, I'm not necessarily saying it should do, but if people want it to function so it remains basically a place where it's got a health service, they pay pensions, where it's a bit like we're used to, but preferably without the crime, then you have to say, actually, that we would have to have immigration. Now, I don't believe for 1 minute that you can keep this thing going by having mass immigration from sub-Saharan Africa, because there aren't enough educated and intelligent people in sub-Saharan Africa who are going to come here and make it work. If you wanted to say, well, actually, we're going to have to bring in 150,000 Chinese or Indonesians every year for the next 15 years, if you want a pension when you reach my age, then you could at least argue for that. But it's not going to happen. They're going to keep on bringing in totally unassimilable immigrants who are not capable, for various reasons, of making our society work. But however much we, the British, complain about it, our political elite will carry on doing it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, that's true. I think I know you say about the fairy tales and stuff like that, but I think really what this country needs now more than ever is a leader that won't compromise on anything. A lot of these leaders you see, like Rishi Sunak, he'll say something about transgenders and then he'll come out and apologise for offending them, or
yeah, sure.
Same with Keir Starmer. You need someone who just comes out and says what they want to say, and they don't apologise. There's no compromise. Because the more backpedaling we're doing, the more supporters that people are we're gonna lose. You need to stand firm.
I agree with you entirely. Again, it's a historical problem that there have been 3 leaders and movements which have taken that position. One was Mosley. Second was Enoch Powell, sat here next to me. And this is a bust, by the way, that he sat for and he commissioned, and he wanted this bust to sit in the Houses of Parliament. But the parliamentarians, although Powell was a great parliamentarian, the parliamentarians after his death refused it. Hence, it sits on my desk and not in Parliament where it should do. So there was Mosley, Powell, and then me and the BNP. And we did not compromise, unless you were to say that by saying forced repatriation is unsaleable, therefore we're going to stand for voluntary repatriation and pay huge numbers of them lots of money to go home. Even that was unacceptable, unsaleable to the British people, not actually because the British people didn't like the message. Mosley was very popular, Powell was very popular, I was very popular, but not popular enough to break through the logjam that is the combination of politics and the media. And basically, we've got a liberal dictatorship in this country. In a few weeks' time, it's going to be a post-socialist dictatorship. They've given up basically on all the old Labour Party things about building council houses and fair wages for the workers. They've just now kept the Labour label and they've attached it to a very, very radical anti-Christian, trans, anti-white colonial guilt agenda. And it's going to be hell. I think within within a year, probably a lot of the things that you say on your broadcast, you simply won't be able to say, you know, unless you're willing to go to prison for it and be silenced for it. We're facing a period of extraordinary repression. It's one of the reasons I believe that Christianity is, again, a very important part of the future, because although some people are willing to be persecuted for their political beliefs, there's nothing like the strength of ability to withstand persecution in politics that there is in the Christian faith. So I think it's very important for us to get through what's coming with as the this is the end of liberal leftism. I don't. This is the other thing where I'm actually not trying to black pill people. I'd say you can actually be hopeful for the future, because we're living through the ends. This is now the last days, and it's the most desperate days, therefore the most extreme days, I think, of this liberal atheist monstrosity that now governs the Western world. It's all based on American power, on the power of the dollar, the value of the dollar, and it's all about to crumble. The world in 10 years' time is going to be very, very different to the world that we live in here and now. So I think all sorts of things will become possible. But again, I'd say, although people don't like to hear it, the idea that we can have political change now and for some years to come is a pipe dream, a tooth fairy thing. And that's why I believe that it's what young nationalists should be doing, is knuckling down to do things, to talk about things which are possible, to do things which are possible. So, you talk about how unsafe our streets are. Well, the BNP ran a very interesting experiment in a town in Wiltshire some years ago. It's one of the best things that the party ever did. We ran a campaign, a local police station was shut. So there were no bobbies on the beat in this town. And although it's not a bad and violent town, it was getting a little bit leery for old people with young kids misbehaving and so on. So our people there set up a thing called community observation patrols, cops. And they just went out with a team of 3 or 4 fellas, mainly ex-military, just looking and watching and being around and taking notes and taking pictures. And initially the police and the powers that be went berserk. In the end, they sort of settled down. And it was very successful, very popular, and it stamped out petty crime on working class estates in a town in Britain. And I think that's the sort of thing that people need to be looking at. As you come on to have kids and thinking about your generation, come on to think about having kids, well, what are you going to do with those kids? For instance, as they're growing up a bit, boys especially, I don't know if you did, but it was a common rite of passage for young lads to go and join the Cubs and the Boy Scouts. How on earth could you put your kids, how can especially Christian nationalists, put your kids into a Boy Scout movement, which is wall-to-wall LGBTQ+, and especially trans? Can't be done. So my position is, instead of spending vast sums of money fighting and losing elections, it'd be far to fight and lose an election well in a British parliamentary constituency. You need to throw £10,000 at it, and you might just save your deposit, get 500 of it back. I believe it'd be far better if a group of young nationalists such as yourself were to use a little bit of that money and that energy and create a fairly low-key, below the radar, so it doesn't get zapped, local Christian nationalist Boy Scouts group, just for our people and people attracted by it. So, it's to say there's no electoral road isn't to say there's nothing we can do. I'm saying there's far better things that we can do than fight and lose elections.
Yeah, well, you make a fair point there. It is quite hopeful to wish that we get into power. Obviously, yeah, from what you're saying, a lot of people have tried and failed. I think it's this mental block we have in Britain. Like I say, people will literally just vote Labour because their parents vote Labour. They'll have no interest in looking into politics. A lot of people don't vote. That's another thing. A large consensus of people don't vote. If you look at London, the winner of the election that was the other week was I didn't vote.
Yes,
it wasn't Labour.
Yeah, by a huge number. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So it's
absolutely slow.
Yeah, I think people need to understand the power of their vote. I mean, if you look at America, it's like a holiday. Everyone goes and votes. Everyone loves voting. No one really cares. I think they've lost all hope. I don't know if that was obviously maybe the same 30 years ago. I wasn't alive then. But now,
It
if
wasn't. It wasn't as bad. I think the critical thing there was the British people had almost, especially sort of conservative with a small c, so working class conservatives, blue collar workers with views very much like ours. I could go into any pub certainly in England, and quite often we used to end up speaking in a pub because we were banned from halls and so on. In any pub to speak to our people, and if there were some of the locals around the bar, and they sort of crane their heads around the door, and they'd gradually come in, and they'd come in and listen. And every single pub I ever did that in, every single local person at the end of it said, "Well, I'm not really interested in politics, but I completely agree with you." There was, but even then, as I said before, the most common reason people gave for not voting for us, they said it's too late, nothing can be done. I'm not really interested anymore. I'm just trying to get on with my life and my family, and that's it. But what has made it even worse now, I believe, is Brexit, because at the very last minute, Brexit was a huge howl of protest from the tax-paying classes of Britain against multiculturalism and mass immigration and take back control of our borders, was what it was all about. And 17.4 million Brits turned out and voted for it. Especially, the Scots didn't vote for it, the Northern Irish didn't vote for it, the Welsh didn't vote for it. They were close. But the English, primarily the English working class and lower middle class, turned out, and people who hadn't voted for decades turned out to vote for Brexit. And on the day after it, woke up and said, right, that's it, we got our country back. And of course, actually, we didn't. Nothing's been done. All that's happened, in fact, is that we've largely swapped Polish immigrants, who at least were Christian and fairly assimilable, other than they're a generation down the line. The only difference between a child of Polish parents in one of our towns and the kids of our people is the fact they've got a surname that even they can't pronounce properly. But what we've done is we managed to swap Poles for Pakistanis and Indians on an enormous scale. So we've now got even more immigration, but it's not even white Christian immigration. And the fact that the elite, that the people gave the elite this enormous instruction, a massive popular mandate to do something and to have a proper Brexit and to save Britain as a British society, and the elite just spat in our face and have done the direct opposite. I think that's gutted that generation, or it says several generations in that, politically for a generation. They're never again going to believe that the democratic process is actually fair and it works, and if we turn out and vote, we will get our way. Because they did so, and they realized it was a lie. So your generation, you've skipped that. So in the next 30, 40 years, there may be a tendency for people naively to think there's a political solution because you haven't gone through the process of voting for the political solution, and then nothing's done.
Yeah, that's right, and it's not just over here; it's the same all over Europe. Like in Germany, a lot of in Germany people don't vote because a lot of them live through the old Eastern Bloc, and they had to tick the box, and they think that now it's the same thing over there, and it's all over Europe. And for someone to say that it's not a plan, i.e. the Kalergi plan, it's not a plan, and it's not, it's completely, it's heinous. I mean, how can you sit here and say that it's not organised? It's not a conspiracy anymore. I mean, the replacement of indigenous people in Europe is definitely happening. And the outcasts of Christianity, it's happening all over Europe. And the only ones that are really opposing it is Poland and Russia. But even Russia have their own immigration problems. But like you say, they can manage it because their law's so strict. If the law was so strict over here, I think we'd have a lot less of an issue. And if people that were coming over actually, if they didn't assimilate, we went, okay, removed, then it would be a lot better. But the fact of the matter is, the law is so lenient and it's like a two-tier policing system. Our people will get persecuted, whereas, the people like the Palestine protesters won't get persecuted. When and the nationalists, although they're counter-protesting, they're kind of counter-protesting for the wrong sort of reasons. They've got right but wrong sort of reasons. They're counter-protesting against the Palestine protesters. They'll get persecuted more. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's a demo today on in London, isn't there? The Tommy Robinson and all GB News people. So they're going to go. They're there on a demonstration about two-tier policing, and yeah, it's true actually that there is very, very clearly two-tier policing, and you put up, and it's been the case for years. It's getting worse. You put up the flag that's behind you, and off out of your bedroom window in a block of flats or on a pole in your front garden, and you'll rapidly have the council or the police, coming around and accusing you of racism, this, that, and the other. And certainly take it on a political demonstration. You can have Palestinian flags all day long, hold a Union Jack, and there's going to be trouble from the police. There is two-tier policing, and there is this. It's a thoroughly racist, anti-white, in general, and especially anti-English position. Not from the minorities so much as from our own political and media elite. This comes from our own people. It is true. But there is a factor also when people say, and I want to know, is this something that you want to mention it? Do you recognise it and say, yeah, that's right? Or is it, I don't know about that? That quite apart from the actual genuine discrimination against us, our people, our skin, our history, our flag, etc., you've also got a fact that why do the police not wade into the Palestinian protests? Well, there's one reason, actually, the fact they're huge. And the cops, if there's a big group and a small group, the cops will always batten the small group because it's easier to beat the small group than it is the big group. You beat the big group on behalf of a small group, and you've got far more people fighting you. So there is that. So the pro-Palestinian people, there's far more of them. They turn out for what they believe in, whereas hundreds of thousands of younger white Brits still turn out and spend vast amounts of money going to football, as opposed to taking part in political demonstrations. So if you don't demonstrate, if your wheel isn't squeaky, it doesn't get any bloody oil. It's as simple as that. But there's another factor that, unfortunately, that the police don't attack the Palestinian protests because the Palestinian protests are orderly, decent, and sober, overwhelmingly. Now, I know there's crazed, fanatic extremist Muslims who stand on the edges and so on and scream stuff about British soldiers. That is not at all, although people on the far right like to pretend that that's the Palestinian protesters. It's not. Those Palestinian protests actually are orderly, decent, and sober. Whereas, unfortunately, you get a group of post-EDL type Brits, 4,000 or 5,000 along, and by 11 o'clock in the morning, they're all pissed. And they're screaming and shouting obscenities and more and stuff. Allah, Allah, who the fuck is Allah? Stuff like this. It's just deeply moronic, stupid stuff. And the police, for all their faults and the fact that they take their orders from an anti-British Home Secretary and the likes of Sadiq Khan and so on, they're also human beings, and they're also there to try and keep order. And if you've got one protest where people are protesting quietly and peacefully, perhaps with extreme placards equating Zionism to Nazism, which I don't believe is an extreme placard at all. It's simply a truth. But you can understand some people might think, well, that's rather offensive. That is not as offensive as 5,000 drunks screaming Allah, Allah, who the fuck is Allah, in a multicultural society where if the Muslims do kick off, lots of cops are going to get hurt. So I do think that part of the problem for the two-tier policing is the fact that in order to have the police respect you and respect your rights, you also actually have to be a respectable, decent people. Yeah. And part of the problem with the Brits, and again, I think this is why Christianity is a really important thing, is that many angry British people have completely forgotten how to be decent, respectable people and how to have a protest which doesn't look like just some drunken brawl and melee.
Yeah, they're drunkards. Yeah, I do agree. A lot of the people that go to these protests, like you say, are old football hooligans and stuff like that, and all they know is drinking, getting pissed, and sniffing coke. So, how can you expect to have an organised political protest where people are actually going to listen to you if you're not presentable at all?
Yeah, so your generation, and again, the people the people that you really work with and talk with and so on. How have you got a serious drugs problem, so that in your own ranks, or are you actually, and for that matter, drink as well? Would you say actually that you're a cleaner, more sensible and decent bunch than the generation before you?
I believe that it's slowly coming, because the thing is with drinking and drugs, it's so ingrained in British culture that it's hard to get out,
Mm.
because that's all people know. People think that life is just going to the club and then going on a holiday once or twice a year to Zante, and then getting with random
Yeah.
people and sleeping with them. Where it's not. That's not how England's worked over the years. But that's what people think and they believe. So they practice it. But like you say, with like now, I think that people are slowly moving towards something more spiritual, but it's going to take a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And before that,
Yeah.
I think stuff's going to get worse before it gets better, definitely. But the
Yeah.
my generation now, I think the hookup culture really destroyed the generation. I mean, it's disgusting. It's immoral. The whole,
Mm-hmm.
you see people now. It's just completely. It's just sexual immorality and depravities running rampant. Drunkenness and drug use it's an immoral generation, and maybe
Yeah.
the generation after me is going to get better, because I've I was just reading something about kids in school now are saying a lot more right wing type of things, but maybe they're better than us. I don't know, but my generation, I don't think there is. I don't think there is hope.
Looking at it, if it makes you feel happy, but it's true as I see it. I think that there are definite signs that uh, your generation, let alone the one before, are not all of them. Some of them are absolutely lost in this hedonistic just thing.
Yeah,
But there is a clear and I think growing minority who are taking a more conservative with a small c and a more spiritual attitude. And certainly, in the my own grown-up kids and their slightly younger friends, they drink and shag a lot less than we used to at their age.
yeah,
So there is some sense, but sort of following on from this, for years now, I've been saying to people, look, you can't complain about young people your age and a bit older, to be fair. You can't complain about the great replacement, about being replaced in your own country when you don't have any kids, and especially in the pre-Christian nationalist movements, the default position was single men in their 30s, still single in their 40s, single in their 50s, and staying single forever. That was the most common single demographic group. Even many of the leaders. Now I've got 4 kids. I've got 10 going on 11 grandchildren. I'm really unusual, right? Not just Britain, all the way across Europe. Time and time again, you've got political leaders of all stripes, but including nationalists who should know better, with no children or one child. And that's the way. You can't complain about being replaced if you don't have kids. So when I've spoken for years now to young people saying, look, the first thing to do is, it's a biblical point of you're not worrying about the mote in someone else's eye when you've got a beam in your own.
yeah.
So the first thing to do if you're worried about the replacement is to settle down and have kids and rear them right. So there's a chance that they'll have lots of kids as well.
Be
And
fruitful,
that's
multiply,
the way it is.
yeah.
And the only again, the reason why I think Christianity is really important in nationalism is there is only one reliable predictor of large families in the whole of humanity, and that's religiosity. And there's only hardcore Muslims, and I don't mean the ordinary ones, as the minute they get here, their birth rate crashes to like ours within a generation.
Yeah.
Only hardcore, radical, quite dangerous in some senses, Muslims, hardcore, radical Jews, and hardcore Christians are the only ones who statistically have large numbers of kids. And so the meek inherit the earth. Those who have children have a stake in and an influence on the future of society. Those who don't. But when I've spoken to young people about this, they say, yeah, all well and good, I get it, but, and this is young men, also tended to say for years, but the young, the girls, they're all slags. They're all just down with clubs. They're all off with different ethnic minorities. I won't mention any names or whatever because we don't want to get banned and I don't want to get you put in prison. So the girls aren't there. So young men are getting this, but girls aren't. And then you've got the Tate sort of position where you've got as a reaction to the undoubted evils of sheer unnaturalness of feminism, you've now got a lot of young men who go to the other extreme and basically end up as incels and just give up on women altogether. So they may as well blow their brains out because they're not going to be there in the next generation. It's finished. So is there a sex divide, or as we say, a gender divide among traditionalists of your generation, that a large number of them are male and there's not girls? Or is there also an element of some young girls who are turning against the hedonism of gut culture and so on, and are available to become your wives in the next few years?
Well, I think a lot of people have, the thing is with Coventry, I don't know if you know, but Coventry's got one of the highest STI and STD rates in the UK, and it's because everyone basically shags each other. And it's it's pretty
Yeah, I'm
disgusting. But
not.
I find around
I'm
here,
not. I'm not surprised. I know Coventry to a degree. I've always felt it's one of. Sorry if you love your town, but I've always thought it's one of Britain's particular shitholes.
I agree with that, mate.
So I'm not surprised. What else is there to do? And if you're not told this is wrong, and if everyone who's held up as a role model, on television, in the music industry, and so on, they're all doing it, why shouldn't a 15-year-old do it as well? They don't know any better, to be honest. So I don't particularly blame them, but I'm not surprised when you say that. But how's it going now?
Well, it's I think there is definitely a sort of divide between the sexes, but that's why I believe I said it before on the podcast as well, that this Andrew Tate, I don't believe he's genuine. I believe he's a plant.
No.
I believe this whole
Mm-hmm.
red pill movement of literally men hating women which is what it is. It's men are literally
Yeah.
hating women. It's not good because it's dividing us even more. There's problems with females and there's problems with males too. And feminism is basically, the red pill is basically, it's a male feminist, and it's
Yes, absolutely
feminism
so.
makes you hate
Well
men.
spotted.
Red
Yep.
pill makes you, hate women, and it's
Yep.
just going to continue. It's more division. We don't need any more division. We need to come together and be like, okay, let's start families. Let's raise beautiful children. Let's take them to church. Instead of this constant division and fighting amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
Women have their faults.
Now
Definitely.
you're a churchgoer, I assume,
Yeah.
personally. So when you go do you go to a Catholic church in Coventry, or do you travel?
Yeah, I'll go Catholic Church in
Yeah.
Coventry.
So are they single young women there as well as young fellas, or
No,
not?
do you know what? I've been to a couple Catholic churches around Coventry. There's a couple young couples. There's a few, but there's not many. It's mainly old people, which it's going to be. But there's a few, and I
Yeah.
think it's picking up. The more churches I go to, the more I see it cropping up. And if I remember from going to because I used to be a Protestant, going to Protestant churches, you don't see any young couples.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see any. But in Catholic churches, I think there's a lot more, and I think that's Catholicism is really the only way. I don't see Protestantism really working. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, look what it done to me.
Have you, when you were going to Protestant churches, were you going to sort of standard Anglican type ones or old-fashioned Calvinist ones, or did you also try the evangelicals?
I tried the evangelicals, not a big fan
Tried
of them.
them as well. And obviously they're thoroughly repulsive, deeply moronic, and thoroughly heretical. But the reason I asked that is that in some parts of the country, for all that they're scarcely Christian, they have lots of young people, including lots of girls. And my recommendation was going to be, if there's a shortage of decent young Catholic girls, then swallow your pride, risk your immortal soul temporarily, find yourself an evangelical church which has some young girls, and find
Just
the right one, and then turn her into a proper Christian and take her to a proper service, and marry her and get her pregnant as soon as possible, and all should be well with your part of the world.
yeah, the evangelical, I couldn't stand it. There's too much singing and dancing going on and stuff like that. It's like and they don't even
Yes,
preach the Bible.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
You see them in the
but
church.
you're not there for religion. You're there on a mission to find a woman, if
Yeah,
needs be.
yeah, deep. I would have to go undercover for one.
I mean, it's very serious this now for you and those like you, because at the age of 19, you think you've got forever, and you can spend time, waste time. No, you can't. If you want a large family, you've got to be married and start having kids by the time you're 25. And in fact, I just wish that someone, I went out with my wife now, we went out for 7 years before we got married. And I just wish that someone, older nationalist figure had said, what are you wasting your time for? Why are you, dating? If you're that committed, get married and have kids. And if someone had said that, I'd have probably taken the point and got married 3 years earlier, would therefore have probably 2 more kids and 5 or 6 more grandchildren. So I'm telling you, don't think because I'm 19 that's really young and so on. You should have set yourself a target of being married within 3 years and being a dad within 3 or 4. So there's a lecture for you, and it's for you and the others as well. But I wish that someone had given me that lecture when I was your age. So you can take it or leave it, but one day if you don't do it, you'll remember, Griffin was right. Well, because I usually am.
Yeah, I was going to say that you've been known to be right in history, haven't you? But, yeah, do you know what? I agree with that though. But I think the main problem with people getting married young, they say they don't want to get married because of the money. It's simply, a lot of people are in relationships and are happy in relationships, but a lot of people just stay in relationships.
I understand completely, and again, when people say we can't afford to have children, what people are actually saying is we can't afford to have children and enjoy all the things that have been presented to us the best thing possible and are right, like to be able to go away on another foreign holiday just because the weather's bad. So we'll book last minute, we'll go to Turkey, it'd be quite cheap. It's only a couple of £1,000. And it's all inclusive and so on. You can't do that. You can't, in particular, you can't have a large family and have a nice car, because you need a big car, and so they're so damned expensive that you've got to have something which is a crock of shit. But that's the thing, that's the sacrifice. So when our family were young, we actually had an old minibus, because at one stage we couldn't afford, a proper 7-seater. They were really rare in those days. You pick them up in Coventry and Birmingham now, because the Pakistanis who are still having lots of big kids, lots of big families, they have cars like that, and as they get older, they sell them off. But it used to be really expensive, so we had a beaten up old minibus. There was a time, this is absolutely true, there was a time when almost the only meat that our family ate was roadkill, because we couldn't afford meat. But our kids did fine, and when people say we can't afford kids, too much poverty or whatever, if your family lived in that area, sort of the Southeast Midlands and so on, for a few generations, you've got coal miners in your family going back 3-4 generations. You must have.
Yeah, my great.
You've got people who are survivors. If you look into your history, you and everyone else watching this and who watches it in future, you are a lot of my family from the Black Country, going back a couple of generations. We're all survivors from the Industrial Revolution. And we're people who are here because our great-grandparents didn't say, I don't know if we're going to have bread next week. I don't know if I'm going to have work tomorrow, because it depends on what the butty man, the man who picks the workers outside the factory gates. I'll have you and you and you. You can fuck off. That was it. But that was the insecurity that they live with on a daily basis, very often not knowing literally if they would have the work if they work or not the next day. But they still had children. And even the dirt poor parts of the Black Country, really, really rough family, they got married before having kids, or at the very least, they got married when the girl was pregnant. Going back, they got married and they had kids because they had faith that somehow or other God would provide, or they'd manage somehow. And you always manage, even if in fact you end up, on the dole in some scummy flat or whatever, working a bit on the black to make enough money to come in. Well, that's what it takes to have children and be part of the next generation and carry our people, your bloodline and our faith forward, then that's what you've got to do. But overall, there isn't a shortage of work in this country. There's there's badly paid work, but anybody who's got half a brain can get a job.
Yeah, that's
It's as
right.
simple as that. The people are crying out for jobs, and yeah, if you spend from someone say a bit younger than this, younger than you on this, age 17, planning to go to university, right? So you spend 3 years wasting your time at university, getting a massive debt like a millstone around your neck, where then the only girls that you meet are ultra feminist, ultra brainwashed liberals, because if they weren't at the start of the university course, they certainly are 6 months in. So you've got no prospects of coming out of that with a decent job, because you come out with a worthless degree in most cases, which cannot be used, and an enormous debt, and a social circle which is automatically chosen to be feminist, atheist, hedonist, utterly useless. So don't do that. Go and get, and in any case, even if you get a job, even if you do a degree which is going to get you a job, it's almost all in fields which in 5 years' time, artificial intelligence is going to be doing the job anyway. So to 16, 17-year-olds watching this, and if it's only one takes note of it, then I'm absolutely happy with the hour and a bit we spent on it. I hope that you will be, that you are. Then if only one takes notice, don't do that. Get yourself a proper trade, which is something a robot can't do, where you simply look around. If you see a trade in which almost everybody who's busy is age 55 and over, which is certainly around here in Shropshire, it's the case with roofers, electricians, plumbers, bricklayers, plasterers. They're nearly all old. You get yourself a trade as a young man in that and get good as your trade and work hard. And yeah, go out on a Friday night and have a drink. But don't go out on a Sunday night and have a drink so you're useless on Monday morning. Then you have a trade which will pay you enough to scrape having a family and scrape your way into being the people who shape the future of this country instead of complaining about its past.
Yeah, totally agree, mate. I think there's as well with the when people are trying to, you say, scrape together and stuff like that. The attitude back then was we'll make it work, but the attitude now is we won't even try. People won't even try
Yes.
to succeed and raise a family. They're not even interested in trying. And that's mainly because there's not enough men in this generation. There's not enough men that just say, let's make it work. No matter what, I want to raise a family with you. I want to have beautiful children and a beautiful family. I want to take them to church every Sunday. Let's make it work. There's not enough men in this generation, and it shows a lot. The whole country has been able to fall this far because there's no men left anymore that are resisting it.
Yeah.
We need to
I
resist.
think so. One other thing, I need to be off fairly soon. I don't know what else you've got planned, but I've got other things to do. One more thing on this, because I think it's a really, really important issue.
Yeah.
But there's also a tendency, some people will then say, yeah, we could try, I could have a family, but we might fail. We might end up divorced. Entirely possible statistically. Obviously you fight against it, but it happens sometimes. There's one reason or another. Sometimes it happens. Okay, is that a failure? It's a failure relative to staying married, but the real purpose of marriage is, the biblical purpose of marriage is to have children. So as long as you have children, then even though it's far from ideal for kids to be brought up with a family that's fallen apart, serial stepfathers and all the rest of it, it's not good, it's harmful educationally, and it's dangerous. But at least those children are there and they're alive and they have a chance. Whereas if you allow the fear of failure to put you off, you then guarantee that you will die lonely and childless and your bloodline comes to an end. So just take the plunge and trust in the Lord and do the best you can. And it's a damn sight better than most of the people out there, and it'll do.
That's right. And Nick, before we go, I just want to say one thing. Did you know that you say about the divorce rates and stuff like that statistically, but did you know that if a couple prays together every night, the divorce rate is less than 1%? So, if you want to stay together,
I didn't know that, but I entirely believe it. Yeah, entirely believe it. Yeah,
you want to stay together,
so.
Pray together every night.
Pray to God. God bless you. Good stuff.
God bless you too. Right, I guess we'll
Okay, well, I'd very much like to hear. I'm not going to stay around and watch the second half of the show because I've got other things to do. It's been great talking to you and getting an insight into how you and your generation feel as well. So many thanks for having me on and taking part on that sort of basis. I'd really like to hear I know the viewership isn't huge, but what your viewers think overall of the show, my message, Nick Griffin, did they even know I was still alive, and so on. So do please, those of you watching, do please let Rory know what you think, and Rory, please let me know as well.
Yeah, of course. I'll show you a couple of the comments after as well when I start posting the shorts. You'll probably get a mixed. We'll probably get called racist a lot, but you probably have some people that agree with us. So, yeah. But I'll definitely show you. Yeah, so it's been good having you on, Nick, anyways. And yeah.
Been a pleasure. I hope it's been useful. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers. God bless. Cheerio. God bless you.
Right, well, that was Nick Griffin. I'm going to take a little break because I'm fucking busting for a piss. How do I pause this? Right, hold on a minute. I've got technical difficulties, yeah. How do I pause it? Tell you what I'll just do this. Right, I'm back. So, I had a lot of people before I let Nick Griffin on. I had a lot of people saying to me, you know, he's racist, shouldn't let him on. But I don't believe he is. I've never seen a clip where he said something that I would deem racist. You know, like he's a good man, he's God fearing man, and I don't see nothing wrong with him having on the show. So if you think there's something wrong with him having him on the show, don't watch. Anyways, let's read some of the comments. Right, I've used different software today, so you're gonna have to bear with me a minute. Drink and shag. Oh, it's only one comment. Right, so you all hate me pretty much. Bastards. But yeah. Right, this half of the show, I'd like to talk about military service, because recently there's talks of a new law being introduced, military service. I didn't speak to Nick on this, but I don't think he agrees with it. See, I am of the opinion that it could work, but we need to have something to fight for. The country needs to be in a state where we can all go, okay, we need to fight. Yeah, we can fight for this. Firstly, before we fight for it, we can't be getting taxed 20% on everything that we earn. There needs to be a flat tax rate, because at the minute we're getting taxed on our, the cars we drive, we're getting taxed on the things we buy, we're getting taxed on our income. We're getting fucked by the tax. And it's not just the tax, the state of living that we're in. There's people that are living, one bedroom flats. That's all they can afford, and there's 5 kids in that. So how can you expect people to fight for this country when they don't recognise the country that they grew up in? It's heinous. And the kids getting out of school, I can see why. I think that would do a lot of good. Something like that, national service. To make people, toughen people up a bit, because we need that. That's what I always say. I always say get into boxing or get into a martial art or something like that, because it toughens you up, prepares you for the world. Because there's a lot of scenarios, when you're going to need something like that. If you're going outside, especially now, there's a lot of danger about, and you need to be able to defend yourself. And I think with the national service thing, especially the army needs a bit of a reform as well. If we're doing the national service thing, because at the minute, you can't even call people a faggot anymore. Like if someone's not doing their press ups, I can't call them a faggot. What's that about? I want to be able to, do you know what I mean? I want to be like, listen here, you little faggot, get on the fucking floor, do 20 press ups. Like, you know what I mean? The army needs a reform. And the country realistically needs a reform before I think it's even acceptable for the government to demand that we do national service when we get out of school. But yeah, what do you lot think? National service, yes or no? I think it could be good. Could toughen us up a bit, which is definitely something that we need. But, I can also see it being... I can also see the argument against it as well, saying, oh, well, why the fuck would I fight for this country? Do you know what I mean? Nothing to fucking defend. I don't really give a fuck. And as well, like, with... there's a lot of talks about, strengthening the army up as well. Why? Like, why are we strengthening up? What's going on? Do you know what I mean? Maybe this conflict, they're scared it'll boil over with Ukraine and Russia or the Israel-Palestine. There's one thing I'll tell you for certain: I ain't dying for Ukraine, and I certainly ain't dying for fucking Israel. So if they think they're sending me there for that, they can piss off. That ain't happening. But the only way that I would fight for this country is if someone invaded it. Do you know what I mean? If France decided tomorrow, yeah, we're going to go try conquer England again, then yeah, I'll defend it. But I'm not going and attacking other countries and killing, people that are just fighting for what they believe in. I'm not dying for a politician. I'm not dying for old men that hate each other. So that, I'm not doing that. And I wouldn't expect any other fucking people my age to do that either. And it's an insane thing to demand. But yeah, drafting. I don't think we'll see another war, like a major war, like World War II in our lifetime, just because of the nuclear war. The nuke. Sorry, I don't think we'll see another one. But yeah, what do you lot think? Drink and shag. Yeah, but I see a lot of the stuff that Nick Griffin says. This is why I wanted to get him on, because it's the reason I started this podcast, I didn't want it to be an echo chamber, but it's nice having someone that actually agrees with you for once, instead of just constantly fucking debating with them pair of fucking idiots ready for the manual. It is nice having someone that sees eye to eye with you, but at the same time, I like a debate. I do thrive in a debate. I love a good debate. But yeah, since you lot are being boring as fuck, I think I'm pretty much going to wrap it up here. God bless you all. See you next week.